At Liam's school career fair, Rachel never imagined her role would be recognized in the way it was. To her, being a hero was just part of the job, but in Liam's eyes, she was the star of the day. Amid smiles and tender gestures, she begins to realize that alongside Andrew and Liam, something much bigger is forming. An invisible bond, but strong enough to change their lives forever. Yet as she looks at the drawing of a simple house with a big tree and a welcoming garden, a question begins to echo. Could she finally leave the past behind and allow herself to be part of a new family? But what will happen when the hardest choices need to be made? If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this one. Riverbend, Massachusetts, was a quiet town with tree-lined streets and cozy homes. But on that autumn afternoon, a scream of pain cut through the calm. Rachel Morgan, a 32-year-old widow firefighter, was in the middle of her shift when she received the call. A school bus accident. She didn't even have time to breathe. She knew the lives of several children were at stake, and adrenaline pushed her to act without hesitation. Upon arriving at the scene, Rachel saw the devastating sight. The bus had flipped over, the windows shattered, and thick smoke hovered in the air. The screams of the children were drowned out by the deafening sound of the siren. She knew time was against her. Without a second thought, Rachel rushed toward the bus, already coordinating the other firefighters and paramedics to rescue the victims. Inside the vehicle, the seats were crumpled, and the smell of burnt metal and fuel was overwhelming. Rachel felt the pressure in her chest and the urgency of the situation. That's when she heard a faint cry coming from the back. She followed the sound and found a small 6-year-old boy trapped between the seats. His name was Liam Carter. He was scared and couldn't move. His big red eyes, filled with fear, could barely focus on Rachel, but she could see the distress on his face. With the skill of someone used to life or death situations, Rachel worked quickly to free the boy. She cut the seatbelt buckles and with a swift movement pulled him from the tight space, wrapping him in a thermal blanket. During the process, she noticed the boy's fragility, like a delicate being in the middle of chaos. His touch made her remember her own traumas, how she too had been a survivor after losing her husband. As she pulled him from the bus, Rachel noticed the boy's father standing across the street, in utter despair. The man, with a distressed expression and tear-filled eyes, watched as Rachel carried his son away from the accident scene. It was Dr. Andrew Carter, the town's renowned pediatrician, known for his dedication at the local hospital. She could see his pain went beyond the fear of losing a child. There was something deeper, an invisible weight he was carrying. Rachel handed Liam over to the paramedics and turned to the man, who still seemed paralyzed. She tried to comfort him with a look, but she wasn't sure if her words would be enough. He seemed like a man who had lost hope, a man who had faced pain more than once. And yet, he looked at her as if she were his only anchor amidst the storm. "Your son is in good hands now," Rachel said softly, a tone she barely recognized in her own voice. But as she looked at him, something stirred within her. She felt that by saving Liam, something of herself was also being rescued, something she hadn't known still existed. Dr. Andrew Carter looked at her with an expression hard to read, but there was a glimmer in his eyes, as if he was beginning to realize that perhaps he could trust again. Rachel felt the weight of her words, but also the lightness of the connection that was forming between them, silent and perhaps irrevocable. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this simple rescue, a heroic act by a wounded woman and a desperate father, would be the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. They were broken souls, but right then, in that moment, fate had drawn a thread of connection between them. But what would happen next? No one could have imagined. The days following the rescue were filled with a disturbing stillness. Rachel Morgan tried to focus on work, but the memory of Andrew Carter's gaze, his silent pain, kept creeping into her thoughts. She didn't know exactly what she was feeling, but there was something deep and incomprehensible in that encounter, something that made her think that perhaps, just perhaps, she could begin to heal not only his son, but herself as well. Then, 3 days after the accident, Rachel arrived at her small apartment, a modest but cozy place. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light on the walls that seemed unreal, as if it wanted to offer some kind of comfort. When she opened the door, something caught her eye. On the living room table sat a large bouquet of sunflowers. The fresh smell of the flowers was delicate, enveloping. A touch of sun, of life, but there was something more. Next to the bouquet there was a note, simple, handwritten. Rachel, I know words will never be enough to thank you for what you did for me and for Liam, but somehow I need to try. You saved me in that moment more than you can imagine. Liam is okay now, and believe me, that was only possible because of you. I am forever grateful, Andrew Carter. Rachel stared at the note for a long moment, the elegant handwriting and sincerity shining through each word. She felt a pang in her chest. That message, simple yet genuine, stirred something she had kept hidden for so long. The weight of her grief, the loneliness of the past 2 years, the ghosts that still haunted her. Everything seemed to have been momentarily erased by those words. The sunflower bouquet, with its yellow, vibrant petals, seemed to challenge the emotional winter she had been living in. But at the same time, fear took over her mind. She was used to isolation, to pain, to absence. Responding would mean exposing herself, opening a part of her life that she had sworn to keep hidden. Grief was a place she knew well. Over the last 2 years, she had closed herself off so completely that any attempt to begin again felt like a misstep, a threat to her fragile peace. That night, Rachel didn't respond. She left the note on the table, beside the bouquet, and allowed herself to feel for a moment that confusing mixture of pain and something that resembled hope. But deep down, she knew she wasn't ready. She didn't know how to be. 2 more days passed. Rachel returned to work, immersed in the same tasks as always trying to push away the feeling that something was dragging, something she couldn't control. But Andrew's note and the sunflowers remained with her, a constant reminder. Then, on Thursday morning, something unexpected happened. She was helping to organize the training room at the fire station when the door opened gently. She looked up and saw him. Dr. Andrew Carter was standing there, in the same simple outfit he wore at the hospital. His eyes, once again, were filled with something Rachel couldn't name. "Hi, Rachel," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I thought it would be good to come in person. I hope you don't mind." Rachel didn't know how to react. He was here, not to thank her, not to relive the rescue, but simply to... What? To reach out, to try to understand what had happened between them. She didn't know, but there was something comforting about his presence. The fact that he was there, not in a hurry, with no clear reason, unsettled her. "Of course. Come in," Rachel said, gesturing toward the corner of the room. Her heart was racing faster than usual, but she didn't know how to control it. The door was open now. There was no turning back. Andrew stepped in and approached, the hesitation visible in his steps. He didn't seem to know exactly how to proceed, how to build a conversation from the uncomfortable silence forming between them. Yet, he didn't give up. "I wanted to thank you, Rachel," he began, his sincerity evident, his eyes locked on hers, "for everything. And if you want, I'd love to invite you for a coffee, just to talk. No rush, nothing more." Rachel swallowed hard. She looked at him, and for a moment her defenses came down. A simple invitation for coffee. It wasn't much, it wasn't a promise. But perhaps it was a beginning. Something light, something new, something she had no idea what it meant, but deep down she felt she should accept. I think I'll accept, she said, almost without meaning to. Her words surprised her, but there was no regret. Andrew smiled faintly, and in that gesture, Rachel saw more than gratitude. She saw someone trying to reconnect, someone who, like her, was trying to find themselves again. They were, in some way, beginning something she didn't know where it would take them, but suddenly it seemed possible. And so, in a small gesture, in the softness of the invitation, a bond was being formed. It wasn't a promise, but perhaps it was the first step towards something unexpected. But what would come next? No one could predict. The morning sun bathed the streets of Riverbend in a gentle, peaceful light, and the crisp autumn air brought with it a sense of renewal. Rachel Morgan arrived at the small local bakery with a tight knot in her stomach. It was just a coffee. A simple invitation, but one that carried something she couldn't quite define. She took a deep breath before opening the glass door, the soft jingle of the bells echoing in the cozy little shop. The aroma of freshly baked bread and freshly brewed coffee immediately surrounded her, a familiar comfort, yet at the same time strange, given what was about to happen. When she entered, Andrew Carter was already sitting at a table in the corner, looking at the menu, but his eyes weren't really focused there. He seemed expectant, yet nervous, as if trying to find the right words before the conversation began. The table was discreet, the space between them wide enough to provide some privacy, but intimate enough for Rachel to feel like she was entering unfamiliar territory. She walked to the table, and he looked up, a shy but genuine smile lighting up his face. Rachel hesitated for a second before sitting down, her hands slightly trembling. The sound of the cup being placed on the table was the first real noise that echoed between them. And for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. "I ordered a black coffee," Andrew said, breaking the silence, his voice gently nervous. "I hope that's okay." Rachel nodded, watching him. She didn't know how to make this conversation happen. They were sitting there, facing each other, but there was still an invisible chasm between them. He didn't know anything about what was going on inside her, and she, in turn, had no idea the weight he carried. Yet there was a silent empathy, a connection that seemed to form in the small gaps of their unspoken words. She picked up the cup and took a sip, feeling the warmth of the liquid. Her fingers touched the porcelain, but the sensation she felt was colder than it was warm. She took a deep breath, trying to gather courage, and finally spoke. I lost my husband in an accident," she began, her voice firm but the pain evident. "He was a firefighter. He died while on duty. It was an emergency like any other, but that night he didn't come back." The words fell into the space between them like stones, heavy and cutting. Rachel looked down at her cup, her hands trembling slightly, but she couldn't stop speaking. The pain she had hidden for so long was there, exposed, and it was impossible to hide. She didn't know why she was telling him this, but the sincerity of the situation, the silent empathy she felt from him, seemed to be the only thing that urged her to open her heart. Andrew was silent, watching her with intensity. He seemed to understand more than she imagined. When she looked at him, Andrew's eyes were slightly misty, but he didn't look away. He didn't speak immediately, only nodded slowly, as if absorbing her words, letting them resonate in the depth of his own pain. "I also," Andrew began, his voice rough and low. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "I went through a divorce. And as if that weren't enough, I'm in a battle for custody of my son. Sometimes it feels like, in the end, nothing turns out the way you expect, no matter how much you fight." Rachel looked at him surprised. She didn't know much about Andrew, other than the fact that he was the doctor who cared for Liam. But there, in that coffee shop, he seemed as vulnerable as she was, sharing a pain she knew all too well. It was a pain that wasn't visible, but it lingered, always present in the little things. "I tried to be strong, you know," Andrew continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But deep down, you start to empty out. The fight for custody, the guilt you carry for not being able to do everything right. I look at Liam and feel incompetent in a way. I know I'm doing my best, but the pain of seeing my son torn between me and his mother, it's unbearable." Rachel fell silent, her eyes fixed on him. She saw Andrew's vulnerability, the way he surrendered to his pain in a way she never thought he would. And somehow she felt a connection with him, something deeper than words. They didn't need explanations, they didn't need answers. There was a silent understanding between them. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as if, in that moment, they both recognized each other's invisible scars. They were two broken souls, but there was something in their gaze that spoke more than any word could express. A shared attempt at healing, a sense that, perhaps together, they could start to understand each other in a way they had never allowed themselves to before. Rachel set her cup back on the table, feeling a strange sensation, a timid hope beginning to bloom. She didn't know where this would lead them, but in that moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, what they had shared wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. And so, as the minutes passed and the coffee cooled between them, Rachel and Andrew realized they had taken a small but significant step towards something more. Something they both feared, but at the same time, something that pulled them with a quiet force. But what would come next? Neither of them could say. Rachel Morgan never imagined that a simple gesture, like rescuing a child from an accident, could lead to such a profound change. Since rescuing Liam, her little hero, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The boy, with his big blue eyes, seemed to not fully understand what had happened. He was just a scared child, but there was something about him that touched Rachel in a way she couldn't explain. It was on a Thursday afternoon, while the usual routine at the fire station carried on, that Rachel came across something that made her stop mid-task. While organizing some papers on her desk, something fell to the floor with a metallic sound. Curious, she bent down to see what it was and found a rusty toy car, the kind every child loves. Simple, yet with a touch of nostalgia. She looked at the object for a moment, feeling a slight surprise. It was a red car with worn wheels and small marks of use, but it was still perfectly functional. Something in Rachel's heart quickened, a feeling of compassion, and she knew exactly what to do. This car, which had probably been lost in the chaos of the accident, was Liam's favorite toy. Somehow, she felt that she needed to return it, as if it were a way to ensure the child didn't lose something important in his life. That simple gesture, an attempt to return something lost, led her toward a door she hadn't imagined she'd open so soon. Andrew Carter's office. She hadn't returned to the clinic since the day of the accident. Despite everything that had happened, the encounter between them was still fresh in her mind. Rachel knew the connection between her and Andrew was growing, but she feared its depth. He was a man who carried his own burden, and she, with her own scars, wasn't sure if she was capable of handling more pain. But here she was, in front of the pediatrician's office door, the toy car in her hands, ready to return something that, in some way, felt more meaningful than simple restitution. When she entered, the familiar smell of the office surrounded her, a soft scent of disinfectant mixed with the welcoming feeling of the place. Andrew was behind his desk, a stack of papers scattered in front of him. He seemed focused, but when he heard the door open, he looked up. Seeing her there, with the car in hand, a spontaneous smile formed on his face. But then, he quickly realized what she was holding, and his smile softened, touched by that simple yet emotionally charged gesture. "Rachel," he said with a softness in his voice, "what did you bring?" She hesitated, a bit speechless, but soon approached the desk and placed the toy car on the surface. "I found this at the accident site," she said, her voice slightly softer than she intended. "I thought Liam should have it back." Andrew looked at the toy car for a moment, as if processing the meaning behind the gesture. His eyes brightened, and he sighed, visibly touched. This means more to him than you realize," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "He always carried it with him, even in the hospital, when he was more at ease." Rachel felt a sense of relief hearing that. She didn't know how much that gesture could mean, but somehow it felt right. Something inside her warmed as she realized she was, in some way, helping heal a small part of Liam's pain. But Rachel's encounter with Andrew was more than just the return of a toy. As he looked at her, there was something new in his eyes, something he hadn't shown before. It was as if, when looking at her, he saw more than just a firefighter, more than the woman who had saved his son. He saw someone who, like him, was trying to piece together a broken life. She realized the distance that still existed between them seemed to be shrinking, but the emotional barrier was still there, invisible but real. I wanted to thank you," Andrew said, his voice a little hesitant. "I know it hasn't been easy for you either. I see the pain in your eyes, Rachel. I know what it's like to lose someone." Rachel didn't know what to say. She felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't the first time someone had spoken about the pain she still carried, but there was something in Andrew's sincerity that made her feel more understood than ever. She had always been used to carrying her pain alone, but he seemed to be the only person who in some way understood what was going on inside her. And without saying a word, he invited her to share that pain, to share her scars, in a way she had never imagined possible. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it," Rachel responded, with a softness that surprised her. "But it's good to know there's someone who understands." Andrew looked at her for a moment, his eyes reflecting deep empathy. "I'm not ready to talk about everything either, but maybe one day we can find a way to deal with it together." There was something in his tone that made her believe that, in some way, they could. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a guarantee, but it was an opening, a door quietly creaking open, even if timidly. That conversation, simple and silent, felt like a step in the right direction. Not a leap, not a revelation, but a seed that was beginning to grow, even if with hesitation, even if with fear. Rachel felt the weight of her own pain begin to soften, not because of words spoken, but because of the presence of someone who, like her, was learning to cope with loss. And as Rachel said goodbye and left the office, her heart lighter than before, she knew that this was just the beginning. What would come next was unpredictable, but one thing was certain. Their worlds, which had been separate until then, were beginning to come together. But what would happen next? No one there could predict. It was a Friday night when Rachel received Andrew's invitation. He invited her to dinner along with Liam at a local restaurant, a small, cozy bistro that served simple dishes, but made with care. Andrew seemed to have noticed that Rachel was, in some way, avoiding opening up further, and the idea of a family dinner, something casual with no pressure, seemed like his attempt to create a safe space where there wouldn't be too many expectations. She hesitated at first. A dinner, simple, with them. She had distanced herself from so much after the loss of her husband, building invisible walls around her life. The pain of her grief still marked her, and the idea of letting someone new in, even if it was just a friendship, seemed too risky. But, somewhere inside, something pushed her to accept. Perhaps it was the kindness in Andrew's eyes, or perhaps it was Liam's innocent smile, which she knew didn't deserve to be overshadowed by the shadow of loneliness she carried. Rachel arrived at the restaurant before Andrew and Liam. She entered and settled at a table in the corner, where she could observe the movement without being the center of attention. The place was small but cozy, with exposed brick walls and a soft, almost golden light that created a relaxing atmosphere. When she looked at the menu, she tried to focus on the dishes, but her mind wandered to the impending meeting. What did she expect from him? From the dinner? From herself? Soon she heard the door open, and when she looked up, she saw Andrew and Liam entering. Andrew smiled when he saw her, and Liam rushed to the table with the characteristic energy of a 6-year-old. His eyes sparkled when he saw her, that familiar gleam of happiness that always came when he was around people who cared for him. "Rachel!" Liam exclaimed, excited. "I picked the best place for us to sit, and the dish I like most too." He pointed to the menu with the confidence of someone who already knew the restaurant well. Rachel smiled genuinely, the sweetness of the moment touching something inside her. It was impossible not to yield to Liam's joy, a joy that seemed oblivious to the complexities of adult life. She looked at Andrew, who was observing her with a calm smile, as though he knew this small gesture from Liam was everything Rachel needed at that moment. "What did you choose, Liam?" Rachel asked, trying to connect with the child, but also in some way with herself. She didn't know why, but she was starting to feel at ease. Liam began talking about his choices, his favorite dish, and of course the dessert. There was something charming about how he talked about food. There was a lightness in his voice, an innocence that made everything around him disappear for a moment. And it was then that Rachel realized how much she had distanced herself from this, from the simplicity, the joy in the little things. During dinner, the three of them shared simple, common stories. Andrew told a few funny anecdotes about his work as a pediatrician, and Liam, with his unmistakable enthusiasm, couldn't stop asking questions about Rachel's life, curiously trying to understand what she did and why she always wore that firefighter helmet. Rachel, with a light smile, explained the basics of her profession, feeling for the first time in a long time that she was truly sharing something of herself. "Have you saved many people, Rachel?" Liam asked, his eyes shining. She looked at him, surprised by the simplicity and depth of the question. "I have, but most of the time, I'm just someone trying to help others. Sometimes the biggest challenge is trying not to be afraid of what we might lose." Liam furrowed his brow for a second, and Rachel realized he was trying to understand what she was saying. He was a child, but there was a rare perception in him, perhaps a legacy from the kind of life he lived, a life marked by struggle, but also by his father's love. Rachel felt deep down that Liam was starting to become part of something bigger. He, unknowingly, was helping her find the courage to open her soul. As the conversation flowed, Rachel realized that something was changing inside her. She smiled more than usual, not because it was forced, but because Andrew and Liam's simple gestures were touching her in a way she hadn't imagined. He, with his silent kindness, and Liam, with his purity, were creating a space where Rachel finally felt she could belong. Something she didn't even know how to name, but that she felt deeply. Genuine smiles, Liam's laughter, the way Andrew seemed to care about everyone's well-being around him. All of this began to make Rachel feel that she was more than just a lonely woman, more than just a firefighter who had seen the worst. She felt that somehow she could in some way be part of something bigger than the emptiness she had been living in. But then, when the plates were cleared away and Liam started to fidget, Rachel noticed something. Andrew was looking at her with a silent expression, full of understanding, but also something deeper which she hadn't been able to identify. Perhaps he saw something in her that she wasn't ready to see yet. The evening ended with a simple goodbye, but the feeling of belonging, shy and unmistakable, stayed with Rachel. She realized that this dinner, simple but meaningful, had marked something inside her, something she didn't know how to name, but that, by opening herself to that moment, she had allowed to blossom. But as she left the restaurant, with the fresh air brushing against her face, she wondered, what did this mean for her? And more importantly, what would happen next? The storm arrived without warning. Suddenly, dark clouds covered the sky over Riverbend, and heavy rain began to fall, turning the town's quiet streets into raging rivers. Rachel Morgan was on duty when the storm intensified. She and her colleagues were busy rescuing families trapped in flooded homes, but time was against them. The sirens blared frantically as the city seemed to be swallowed by the water. With each passing hour, the situation worsened. Rachel was used to handling crises, but this night felt different. The weight of the unrelenting rain and the sound of the wind cutting through the city made her feel an odd sense of foreboding. The chaos was palpable, but she still kept her composure, guiding her team of firefighters with precision. However, when the vehicle she was in became stuck, trapped in a flooded street, she knew they could go no further. With the water rising through the streets, the vehicle was stranded. Communication with the rescue center was failing due to the storm, and the rain showed no signs of easing. Rachel knew she was in a delicate situation. Her colleagues were miles away, occupied with other evacuations, and she, alone, had to find a way to get out of there. She stepped out of the vehicle, trying to assess the situation, when the sound of an engine in the distance cut through the storm. She looked toward the road through the torrential rain and saw a familiar figure. Andrew Carter, driving his truck, approaching at high speed. He was there once again, unexpectedly, as always, when she needed him most. The truck stopped next to Rachel's vehicle, and Andrew quickly jumped out, soaked by the rain but with a determined expression. Their eyes met, and something silent passed between them. It was as if, without words, he already knew what she needed. And once again, he was there to rescue her. "Rachel, are you okay?" Andrew shouted above the sound of the storm, already running toward her. She nodded, though she knew the situation was far from safe. The water was rising quickly, and they needed to leave before it was too late. Andrew took her hand and guided her to the truck. "We're heading to the nearest gas station. They'll get you there until the water goes down." Rachel didn't protest. She knew there was no time for discussions. They climbed into the truck, and Andrew drove quickly, trying to avoid the most flooded areas. The wind and rain made visibility almost zero, but he maneuvered skillfully, always focused on the road that seemed to dissolve into a sea of water. When they finally reached the gas station, the place was deserted, except for a few dim lights and the constant noise of the rain. They parked and entered the small establishment, where the only company was the sound of the wind outside and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. Rachel leaned against the counter, trying to compose herself. She was exhausted, drenched, and her body felt heavy. Andrew, also completely soaked, watched her with a concerned expression, but with no hurry. He knew she needed a moment to rest, just as he did. "We'll stay here until the rain passes," he said in a calm tone, as if there was nothing more to do but wait. The storm shouldn't stop anytime soon. Rachel looked at him, gratitude and tension mixed in her eyes. She felt the physical exhaustion, but there was also a sense of comfort she couldn't explain. They were there, in an unlikely place, seeking shelter in the middle of the storm. But what truly touched her wasn't the rain or the safety of the gas station. It was the fact that somehow she wasn't alone anymore. He was there, as always, as if he were a constant presence in her life. As they settled in, Andrew moved closer and sat beside her, still drenched but looking calmer than she felt. The night was quiet, except for the sound of water hitting the roof and the words that finally began to slip from his lips. "Have you been in situations like this before?" he asked softly. "I imagine that, as a firefighter, you must have seen a lot. It must be tough, huh?" Rachel looked at him, surprised by the simple but profound question. She'd never really talked about her experience at work, nor about the things that emotionally affected her, the losses, the rescues, the lives she tried to save, but sometimes couldn't. "Yeah, it's tough," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "But what people don't know is that you get used to it. You learn to do what's necessary without allowing yourself to feel too much. It's easier that way." Andrew watched her for a moment before responding. "I get it. I've also gotten used to keeping control until everything started falling apart. The divorce, the fight for Liam's custody. Life's never been easy, Rachel, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly fix things." Andrew's words fell heavily in the air, and Rachel felt touched by them. She knew this pain, this feeling of being lost, of not having control. But deep down, she also felt something else. She felt that, in some way, he was sharing a piece of his own vulnerability with her, and that somehow made her feel like she wasn't as alone as she thought. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm outside. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, and only the two of them were there, sharing a fraction of their pain. But there was also something more, something growing in the space between them. It was a sense of silent understanding that despite the fears and scars, perhaps there was something still worth rebuilding. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm starting to believe that maybe the pain we carry, the losses we face, can teach us to find something new, Rachel said, her voice soft and hesitant. Andrew looked at her, and a small smile appeared on his face. "I've started to believe that too." In that moment, amidst the storm, they both knew that something was changing between them. Something that couldn't be explained, but was silently forming, like a truth that escaped in the silence. But what did this mean for them, and what would happen next? No one could predict. The bond between Rachel and Andrew seemed to intensify with each passing day. After weeks of casual encounters and silent conversations, the barriers she had built over the years began to crumble. Deep down, she knew she was approaching something new, something that, although tempting, also gave her an unsettling sense of fear. She had lost herself in the idea of rebuilding her life, but the ghost of her late husband, who had died in a service-related accident, still hovered over her like an impossible-to-ignore shadow. But that day, with Andrew and Liam, had been different. They spent the afternoon together in one of the few quiet moments the town had. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those that seemed to be taken straight from a simple story, where happiness was earned in the little moments. Liam's laughter as he drew with his colored pencils, the way Andrew looked at her with a light smile, the sound of water bubbling as they prepared dinner. For a moment, Rachel found herself completely absorbed in that scene, almost forgetting the pain that still pulsed in her chest. When night fell and the two of them were saying goodbye at her front door, the tension between Rachel and Andrew had become palpable. She felt the warmth of his body close to hers, the subtle scent of his skin, and for a brief second, the sensation of belonging. Eyes met, and before either of them could say anything, he gently pulled her toward him. The kiss was silent at first, hesitant, as if both were searching for something, but also fearing it. When their lips finally met, it was like a silent explosion. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the kiss spread through her body, the gentle touch of his hands on her skin, the way the world around them disappeared. She never imagined she could feel something like this again, that something other than pain could make her heart beat so hard. But right after the kiss, reality hit her like a storm. A shiver of guilt ran down her spine. She quickly pulled away, fear reflecting in her eyes. She wasn't ready for that, not prepared to open her heart again, especially after everything she had lost. Her husband. She still felt him so present. The love she shared with him was irreplaceable. The kiss with Andrew, as genuine and impulsive as it was, felt like a betrayal, a break of the silent promises she had made to herself. "I'm sorry, Andrew," she said, her voice trembling, stepping back a step. "I can't do this. Not now." Andrew looked at her, his eyes full of understanding, but also pain. He knew something was wrong, that she was pulling away. He wanted to speak, wanted to understand, but didn't know how to do that without pressuring her. "Rachel, I just want you to know that I'm here, but if you're not ready, I understand. Just let me know what's going on." But Rachel couldn't respond. She quickly turned and went inside, slamming the door behind her with a muffled thud. She leaned against the cold wood, her breath heavy, her heart racing out of control. What was she doing? Why was she acting this way? Why was she running from something that, deep down, made her feel alive again? In the days that followed, Rachel withdrew. She started avoiding Andrew, ignoring his messages and attempts to reach out. At first, it was just a small distance, an excuse here, another there. But soon, it became a pattern. She began avoiding meetings, hiding in the shadows of her own pain, something she knew all too well. Guilt paralyzed her. How could she allow herself to be happy again after everything she had lost? She no longer knew how to deal with her conflicting feelings. The emptiness consuming her was still greater than anything else. She found herself in a vicious cycle where the fear of moving forward mixed with the need to close herself off even more. Rachel didn't know what to do, didn't know how to heal the wounds that were reopening inside her. And the worst part, she didn't know how to explain this to Andrew. How could she, after everything he had already done for her? It was on a cold night, when the storm had finally eased, that Rachel received an unexpected call. It was Liam. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard the boy's trembling voice on the other end of the line. "Rachel? Rachel, can you come here? Mum's not home and I have a fever. It hurts so much." Panic gripped Rachel and she didn't think twice. Without hesitation, she grabbed her car keys and rushed out, leaving behind the pain and confusion. Liam needed her. He was suffering, and at that moment nothing else mattered. What she had done, what she was feeling, didn't matter if he was in pain. She knew, without thinking, that her place was by his side, just like it had been in the moment of the rescue, and she would go to him. When she arrived at Andrew's house, she found Liam in bed, his face pale and burning with fever. Andrew was beside him, visibly worried but relieved to see her enter. She approached Liam and carefully touched his forehead, feeling the burning fever. Andrew looked at her, and the two shared a silence filled with everything that was still unsaid. But in that moment, neither of them needed words. The fear, the guilt, the insecurities, they all took a backseat to Liam's well-being. Rachel felt a wave of emotions flood her, concern, exhaustion, relief. But above all, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The weight of guilt was there, but it no longer paralyzed her, because for a brief moment, love and the need to care for someone had overcome the pain of loss. And in that silence, she knew that despite everything, maybe it was time to begin again. The night was colder than usual, and the streets of Riverbend were deserted under a sky heavy with clouds. Rachel felt an unease within her, something that pushed her to act without thinking. When Liam's call woke her up, she had no doubts. The pain in the boy's voice, that simple but desperate plea, made her run without hesitation. She forgot the fear, the insecurities, and the questions still echoing in her mind. Liam needed her. She had done this before, and now it was as if a part of her being knew exactly what needed to be done. Arriving at Andrew's house, she found the boy lying in bed, his eyes half closed from the high fever. Andrew was beside him, his face marked with worry. His eyes lit up when he saw Rachel arrive, but there was a silent tension between them. She knew something was different. They were there, in the same space, with Liam's life at risk, but there was also something more, something that couldn't be ignored. "Rachel, he's burning with fever. I tried giving him medicine, but it doesn't seem to help." Andrew looked exhausted, and his voice was full of anxiety. Rachel approached Liam, touching his forehead. The temperature was alarming. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. "We need to take him to the hospital now." Her voice was firm, but there was a touch of gentleness, as if concern had found a way to surface, turning her determination into care. They rushed to Andrew's car, and the drive to the hospital was a blur of distorted lights and confused thoughts. Liam was silent in the back seat, his breathing irregular, his small body fighting the fever. Rachel felt the weight of fear inside her, but she didn't allow herself to succumb to it. She knew she needed to be strong. For him, for Andrew, for herself. When they arrived at the hospital, the emergency team was ready to act swiftly. Andrew stayed by Liam's side as the doctors examined him, and Rachel remained nearby, watching, not knowing what to do, but wishing with all her might to ease the boy's pain. The night was long and silent. The hospital was calm, with dim lights in the hallways and the soft sound of the nurse's footsteps. Rachel sat in a chair next to Liam's bed, her eyes fixed on his pale little face. The fever was a bit more controlled, but the boy's sleep was restless. He shifted, whining occasionally, and it broke Rachel's heart. She stood up and walked to Andrew, who was in the waiting room, his expression tired but determined. He turned when he heard her approach. "He's improving. The fever is starting to go down, but he still needs monitoring," she said, trying to convey relief that wasn't entirely there yet. Andrew looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Thank you for being here, Rachel. I know you don't have to, but it means the world to me." To him, she felt the weight of his words. Rachel knew that, in that moment, the distance she had always kept between herself and the rest of the world was beginning to fade. Andrew saw her differently now, not just as the woman who saved his son, but as someone who perhaps could be part of his life in a way she wasn't willing to admit. And she, too, saw something in him that she couldn't ignore, something that made her want to stay, despite all her fears. Rachel didn't know how much time passed until the doctors said Liam could finally rest. She sat back down by his side, watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling gently. The tension in Rachel's body began to dissolve, but a new feeling started to flood her heart. The night was cold outside, but inside she felt something warm stirring within. Andrew was standing next to the bed, silently watching his son. When Rachel looked at him, their eyes met, and for a moment there were no more words to be said. There was no need for them. Everything was spoken in the gestures, in the simple act of being there, together, on such a long and uncertain night. When Liam finally fell into a deep sleep, Rachel stood up, feeling exhaustion take over her body. She walked over to the hospital room window, looking at the city lights below. The world seemed so distant, so vast, but here, in this small space, all that mattered was Liam's life and the silent connection she was beginning to feel with Andrew. "You'll stay with me, won't you?" Andrew asked, his voice soft but carrying a vulnerability Rachel hadn't expected. He was on the verge of something. She could feel it. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, the emotional distance between them finally broken by the vulnerability of the situation. She realized that, in that moment, she wasn't just fulfilling an obligation or doing what seemed right. She was there because she wanted to be. "I'll stay," she replied, with a softness in her voice that surprised her. "I'll stay with you." And it was in that moment, as the early hours of the morning passed and Liam rested peacefully, that Rachel understood. She wasn't running anymore. For the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to stay. Stay with them. Stay with whatever was coming next, because deep down, she knew that what awaited her was something more than pain. It was a chance to begin again. But what would that mean for their future? What would she do with the feelings beginning to grow inside her? No one knew. The courtroom was packed. The sound of low conversations and papers being shuffled mixed with the constant hum of the city outside. But inside that room, the air was heavy, filled with tension. Rachel Morgan sat in the front row, her eyes fixed ahead, where Andrew and his ex-wife Claire faced each other in a battle for custody of Liam. She knew how much this meant to him. Liam's life, the future of their family, everything was at stake in that moment. and Rachel felt a deep weight in her heart. She knew that no matter what happened in that courtroom, she would do everything she could to help keep Liam with Andrew. Andrew's ex-wife was sitting in the defendant's seat, her posture rigid and her eyes cold, as if none of this was personal. For Claire, this was just a procedural matter. She wanted custody of Liam to regain control over her life and, apparently, to prove she could be the mother Liam needed. However, Andrew knew that since the divorce, his ex-wife had emotionally and physically distanced herself from Liam. Now it seemed she was willing to fight for him as if he were a trophy, without understanding the true essence of what it meant to be a parent. Rachel watched, feeling the conflict within herself. She knew it wasn't her battle, it wasn't her place, but something inside her pushed her to be there. Over the past few weeks, she had grown closer to Andrew and Liam, and the love she felt for them, something she hadn't wanted to admit before, made her feel like she had a responsibility. She couldn't hide from the truth anymore. "I swear I'm doing the best for him," Andrew said, his voice full of emotion, but controlled as he sat in the witness stand. He looked at the judge with sincerity that no one could doubt. He had been a dedicated father to Liam from the start, and despite the struggles and lonely nights, he had never faltered. That was the strength of his love for Liam. He wanted to be the best father possible, not only to protect his son, but to give him a better life. Claire, on the other hand, spoke with the same coldness as always. She used the strategy of presenting herself as the mother who always had the best intentions, the one who, despite past mistakes, was now ready to fix her life. But her eyes didn't have the shine of the true emotional connection that Andrew's had when talking about Liam. It was a cold, legal fight, and that hurt Rachel more than she imagined. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to regain her composure, trying not to let the weight of this struggle consume what she knew to be the most important thing: Liam's love. She wanted to be there, by Andrew's side, not just as a witness, but as someone who believed in what he represented. And above all, she wanted Liam to have the chance to be happy, to grow up in a home that truly loved him. The judge paused and looked from side to side. Claire had already finished presenting her defense, and now it was Andrew's turn to make his final statement. Rachel felt the tension in the air, an uncomfortable stillness as everyone awaited the final verdict. Andrew stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the front of the courtroom. I never wanted to be here," he began, his voice firm, but filled with a pain he couldn't hide. "I wanted my family to stay together. I wanted Liam to grow up with his mother and me by his side. But after everything that's happened, I realized that as much as my ex-wife has been a big part of Liam's life, I am the person he needs now. I am the person who will be with him, take care of him, and show him what love, dedication, and responsibility truly mean." Rachel felt her heart tighten as she heard those words. Andrew wasn't just fighting for his son's custody. He was putting all his emotions out there, without hiding anything, without pretending. Above all, he was a father. And in that moment, Rachel felt a wave of admiration and love for him, something she hadn't fully realized until that instant. She wanted to shout to the courtroom, to everyone there, that he deserved custody of Liam. But she stayed silent, just watching, feeling her connection to them grow with each word Andrew spoke. The judge pondered for a moment. The silence in the room was deafening, and Rachel could barely breathe. Finally, the judge declared the verdict. Custody of Liam would be granted to Andrew, with supervised visitation for Claire. The victory, though important, wasn't easy. The ruling was tight, almost a tie, but Andrew had won. The room erupted in murmurs and sighs of relief. Andrew lowered his head, his hands trembling as he turned to look at Rachel. She stood up and walked toward him without thinking. The moment he saw her, his eyes were glowing with a mix of relief and something deeper, something she didn't know he was ready to admit. "You did it," she said softly, touching his arm in a comforting gesture. He smiled, but instead of answering, he pulled her close and wrapped her in a tight embrace. It was a hug full of gratitude, relief, and something that, for the first time, Rachel realized: he loved her, perhaps as much as she loved him. Andrew pulled back slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "Rachel, I don't know how to thank you. I feel like I'm not the man I used to be. And all of this is because of you." She looked at him, feeling the confusion and truth mixing. She knew what he was saying, and she also knew what she felt. But there was something still holding her back from taking the next step. I feel something too, Andrew," she said, her voice trembling, "but I still don't know what to do with that." He smiled gently, his look affectionate and full of understanding. "I can wait. I'll wait for you, Rachel, but I won't give up." As the courtroom emptied, Rachel felt the strength of that moment expanding within her. She had helped Andrew win Liam's custody, but now she realized that perhaps she had found a new family, a family that, despite its improbability, was embracing her with all her flaws, fears, and insecurities. And more than ever, she knew this was just the beginning. Time, with its silent persistence, had transformed Rachel and Andrew's relationship from a simple connection of mutual support into something deeper, more intimate. Rachel's frequent visits to her apartment became less and less as Andrew's house, with its soft lighting and the smell of dinners often prepared by him, became her refuge. Each night, without fail, Liam called her family, and Rachel felt her heart expand with the simplicity of that word, as if everything she had built over years of loneliness was now being undone by this small gesture. Rachel never imagined it would be so easy to feel at home again. But there, within the walls of Andrew's house, with the sound of Liam's laughter echoing through the rooms, she began to realize that for the first time in many years, she wasn't just surviving. She was starting to live again. It was on a calm Friday night, after a long day of work and a difficult rescue, that Andrew invited her to dinner. It was something simple, but the kind of gesture Rachel had begun to value more than she could express. She had grown accustomed to her solitude, the nights spent watching TV or reading alone. But with him, with Andrew and Liam, she experienced a sense of belonging she never knew she needed. "I made a new dish today," Andrew said with a mischievous smile as she walked into the kitchen, where the smell of fresh herbs and olive oil filled the air. "I know you like simple food, so I hope you like it." Rachel laughed softly, but the tension she usually felt when accepting his hospitality seemed to be vanishing. She was already becoming accustomed to the feeling of being in his home, of being part of something bigger than herself. "I confess, I'm curious, Dr. Carter, but I'll only trust your cooking skills if you promise me it won't be something with too much seasoning." Andrew smiled with the corner of his mouth, the natural smile he wore when he was about to do something unexpected. "Nothing too fancy, I promise. Just some roasted chicken with herbs and potatoes. But if you don't like it, you can blame my mom for teaching me to cook like this." During dinner, the conversation was light, unhurried, as if the three of them were just living the moment. Liam, with his boundless energy, asked about Rachel's day, her rescues, and of course how she felt about their family. His innocent and direct words were like a soft melody in the background of a day, stretching to the rhythm of comfort and connection. After dinner, Rachel stood to help clear the table, but Andrew, as always, insisted on doing it himself. She knew how much he liked to take care of things, to make sure everything was perfect. When he finished, he stood beside her, and the silence between them grew heavy, as if the physical space between their bodies was the only obstacle to be overcome. Rachel looked at him, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange. They didn't need words to know what was happening. They were there, close enough to feel each other's breath, and Rachel felt a part of herself giving in. "I never thought that," Rachel began, but her words faltered. She tried again, I never thought this would happen, that I would let myself be here with you and with Liam, but now, with time, with everything that's happened, I feel like I'm finally in the right place." Andrew looked at her with a softness that disarmed her. He moved closer, lightly touching her arm, as if asking for permission. "Rachel, I never thought this would happen either, but maybe that's why we're here. Maybe this is exactly where we're meant to be." He stepped closer, the distance between them disappearing, and when their lips met, it wasn't just a kiss. It was a kiss of surrender, of years of suffering and loss being left behind. She surrendered to that moment in a way she never had before, as if all the defenses she had built over the years fell away in an instant. The kiss deepened slowly, and Rachel felt her heart race in her chest. She felt alive in a way she hadn't since her husband's death, a sense of renewal she had begun to fear. But there, with Andrew, she didn't want to run anymore. She felt protected, loved, and the fear began to fade away. They pulled away for a moment, breathless, and Rachel, still with her eyes closed, felt the words escape her lips before she could stop them. "I love you, Andrew." Those words, spoken with such honesty and vulnerability, were like a rebirth for her. It was the first time she had said those words without reservations, without the fear of making a mistake, without carrying the weight of loss. She felt that by saying them, she was finally surrendering to something good, something she didn't know she could still have. Andrew looked at her, his eyes shining with something she hadn't recognized until that moment. "I love you too, Rachel," he said, his voice deep, full of emotion. And it wasn't just his voice that conveyed it. It was his look, full of affection and gratitude, as if he was finally opening the door to a future they had both unknowingly waited for. The night continued softly, yet intensely, with the two of them surrendering to the closeness and affection. They slept together for the first time, not as two people trying to find each other amid the pain, but as two souls who had finally recognized one another, who had finally allowed themselves to love again. That night, Rachel realized something she had never imagined she would feel again. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, and more importantly, she was loving, again, in a true way, without fear, without reservations. And for the first time in years, she knew that despite all the uncertainties of the future, she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was a peaceful autumn morning, with the sun shining gently and the cool wind dancing through the trees, when Rachel Morgan found herself in an unexpected place, the school career fair of Liam. Although it wasn't an occasion she had planned, there was something about the idea of being there, among children and parents, that made her feel part of something bigger. She, the firefighter who was always used to being the hero in her own world, was now the star of the day in the eyes of a boy who considered her without hesitation his hero. When Rachel arrived at Liam's school, she was greeted by a warm smile from Andrew, who was standing next to Liam, eagerly awaiting her arrival. Andrew looked more relaxed than she normally saw him, but his eyes were shining with pride, a silent but immense pride. Liam, for his part, was impossible to contain. His blue eyes were shining with excitement, and he couldn't stop looking at Rachel, as if she were the most important thing there. "Rachel! Rachel!" Liam shouted, running to her as soon as he saw her, his little arms wrapped around her in a tight hug. "You're going to be my hero at the career fair, you know? Everyone's going to be so impressed with you." Rachel laughed, a soft and genuine sound, patting the top of Liam's head as she hugged him back. "Me? A hero?" she said with a knowing smile. "I'm just doing my job. But it's nice to know you see me that way." Andrew watched them, his eyes full of affection. The way Liam saw her, the way he admired her, touched something deep inside him. To Andrew, it was clear. Rachel was already part of their life, in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. Their connection was growing stronger every day, and he was beginning to allow himself to believe that this was perhaps the family he had always imagined. Not perfect, but true. The career fair was in full swing, with children and parents talking to doctors, lawyers, scientists, and other professionals. Each booth was decorated with colorful posters, panels, and informational displays, but when they arrived at Rachel's table, everything seemed to pause for a moment. The children, with their curious faces, looked at her, fascinated. And then Liam, with the proudest smile in the world, began to introduce Rachel as if she were the most amazing thing that ever existed. "This is Rachel," Liam said, his chest puffed with pride. "She's a firefighter, and she's saved a bunch of people. She's the best." Rachel's smile widened, but a wave of humility washed over her. She wasn't used to being seen this way. To her, being a firefighter was just that, a job. But seeing Liam's eyes shining with admiration, seeing how he viewed her as a true hero, made her feel more alive than ever. She crouched in front of the children who were listening to Liam, and with a soft and engaging voice, she began to explain what it meant to be a firefighter. She spoke with enthusiasm, making it clear to everyone that being a firefighter was much more than just a profession. It was a commitment to the community, a commitment to life. Rachel saw the children's eyes widen, absorbing every word, and that made her smile even more. She didn't know how, but at that moment she felt that her life, her profession, was finally taking on a bigger meaning. After a few minutes, Andrew approached, looking at Rachel with affection, and then at Liam, who was showing his own drawings to the other children. He walked up to Rachel and, in a quiet tone, said, "I'm so proud of you. Liam really sees you as a hero, not just for being a firefighter, but for being who you are. He loves having you around." Rachel looked at Andrew, and a wave of emotion washed over her. She had never expected her life to take this turn. Not only was she helping a child feel safer and protected, but she was being accepted as part of a new family, a family she hadn't known she could have. And the truth, though still hard to accept, was that she was beginning to like being part of it. The afternoon passed quickly, with conversations and laughter shared with the other children, and soon the career fair came to an end. On the way home, while Liam was perched in the back seat, his school drawings scattered everywhere, Rachel and Andrew looked at each other in the rearview mirror, a shy smile shared between them. "Did you see how he was talking about you?" Andrew commented, with a look of affection on his face. "He already sees you as part of the family. And I do too, Rachel. I see that now." Rachel felt touched by Andrew's words, but at the same time a sense of nervousness arose. She knew that in some way that meant more than she was ready to admit. She didn't know if she was prepared to open her heart again, especially with the fear of losing everything she was starting to build. When they got home, Liam rushed to his desk, where he started drawing animatedly. After a while, he turned around and with a cute and sincere expression said, "Mom, Dad, look, I drew the new house, and you guys are going to live in it, right? As a family." Rachel's eyes filled with emotion as she looked at Liam's drawing. It was a simple house, with a garden and a big tree, but there was something so genuine in the way he saw it. He wanted everyone to live there, together, as a family. Rachel looked at Andrew, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel what she hadn't been able to accept. She was starting to imagine living in that house, living with them. She knew it wasn't an easy decision, but there was something in her heart that told her she was finally ready to make that choice. "Yes, Liam," she replied with a soft smile. "I think maybe we really can live together." And with that, a new chapter began to form. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't planned, but it was true. The family they were creating, not out of obligation but out of choice, was starting to take shape. And Rachel, though still scared, knew she was opening herself to the possibility of something bigger, something she never imagined could be possible. But deep down, one question remained. What did this mean for their future? No one knew yet. The hall was crowded, but all attention was focused solely on Rachel. The soft hum of conversations in the background was drowned out by the thunderous applause from those present, clapping enthusiastically. The bravery medal was in her hands, heavy with the meaning it carried, but Rachel didn't mind the weight. She knew that what really mattered was what was happening in that moment. She was being recognized not just as a firefighter, but as someone who had pushed her own limits, fought her own battles, to do good, to save lives. Andrew stood by her side, his face beaming with pride. He had been her rock, the constant support through everything she had faced. He didn't need to be there, but he was, as always, by her side, through the good and the bad. And she knew he knew what that medal meant to her, a symbol of a journey that had begun long ago, but had only now felt truly completed. The ceremony was brief, but full of meaning. The presenter spoke about Rachel's courage, about the lives she had touched, the risks she had taken to help others. Every word seemed to be filled with gratitude, not just for her work as a firefighter, but for her willingness to risk everything to save those she would never meet. Every gaze in the room made her feel that in some way she was finally being seen as someone important. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Andrew approached Rachel with a soft but intense smile. He had something in his hands, something she wasn't expecting. It was a small velvet box, a soft glow coming from within. When she looked at him, curious and surprised, he extended his hand, offering her the small gift. "Rachel," he began, his voice filled with something she couldn't name. "This medal, this honor, it's yours. But this," he paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "This is a symbol of something that has nothing to do with bravery. It's a promise that you can stay." Rachel looked at the ring he was holding. It wasn't an engagement ring. It didn't have sparkling diamonds or excessive shine. It was simple but elegant, with a delicate gold band, like a symbol of something greater. Something she still didn't know how to define, but that she felt with every fiber of her being. "You gave me a home, Andrew." "It's not just this ring," Rachel said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You gave me something more, something I thought I'd never have again." Andrew smiled, and with a gentle gesture slid the ring onto her finger. The way he looked at her, as if he was doing something sacred, made Rachel's heart beat faster. It was as if in that moment, it wasn't just a ring being placed on her finger, but a promise being made, a choice being made. "You have more than the right to stay, Rachel. You're already here. And I couldn't ask for more than that," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that touched every word he spoke. Rachel felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sadness. It was relief. It was happiness. She knew, deep in her heart, that this promise wasn't just about her staying there with Andrew. It was about them choosing each other, despite all the uncertainties, despite all the difficulties. It was about their life together, a life they were building, something simple but real. Meanwhile, Liam, who had been sitting at one of the nearby tables, watched them with his curious eyes. When he realized the ceremony was ending, he ran over to them, his usual smile on his face. But today, there was something different in his eyes, something Rachel couldn't ignore. "I love you, Rachel," Liam said, with an unexpected sweetness, but full of sincerity that could melt any heart. Rachel looked at the boy, surprised but also deeply moved. She had been a mother in many ways, but had never been called Mom by Liam. And now, there, in the midst of all the moments she no longer knew how to interpret, he was calling her Mom. And suddenly, everything seemed to make sense. She wasn't just trying to find herself. She was there, with them, a family, in every sense of the word. "I love you too, Liam," Rachel said, her voice faltering for a moment, but full of emotion. She crouched down to hug the little one, squeezing him close, feeling her heart expand with that simple but true love. Andrew watched it all with a quiet smile, but his eyes were shining with a feeling he could no longer hide. He walked over to Rachel and Liam, and together, the three of them shared an embrace. It wasn't an embrace of farewell or separation, but one of unity, of acceptance, the kind of hug only a family can give when they finally find each other. That night, as the city lights shimmered in the distance, the three of them headed home. Their home. The simple house, now filled with 3 toothbrushes, the constant smell of fresh coffee, and the sound of laughter coming from the living room. It was a house full of imperfections, but also full of love. And when Rachel stepped inside, for the first time in a long time, she felt that she didn't need to look for anything else. She had already found everything she needed. Their house, built from the ashes of loss and disappointment, was now full of life, full of love. And Rachel knew with certainty that she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Between smiles, promises, and the simple gesture of a drawing, Rachel finally found what she had been seeking for so long: belonging. She had been saved many times, but now she was the one saving herself deep down by accepting the love that Andrew and Liam were offering her. With each passing day, she allowed herself more, letting herself become part of a family she never knew she could have. And on a quiet night, with their hands intertwined and a ring that sealed a promise, Rachel knew, with the certainty of someone who has lived, that a true home is built with what we give, with what we are willing to receive. It's not perfection that makes us a family, but the choice to love, to stay, even when the pain of the past still echoes. Because in the end, the true strength of a family lies in the ability to choose each other every day. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what keeps us alive here.